Hello students, welcome to the lecture on social stratification, class and social mobility. This is the seventh chapter of SOC 101 course, and I would expect by now you have already listened to Professor Shaidur Rahman's lecture on what is stratification, importance of reducing inequality, Marx and Weber's view on inequality, and functional and conflict view of inequality as well. So I hope you have already understood the overall concept of inequality and how it functions in our society. I, however, will discuss different systems of stratification and social mobility. So let's start with different systems of stratification. By now, I also would expect that you do have a bit of understanding about inequality, and I just wanted to briefly explain a little bit about that before I move on to the system of inequality. So inequality describes a condition in which members of a society have different amounts of wealth, prestige, and power. You probably see that this is also applicable, equally applicable in Bangladesh society as well. For example, according to the Household Income and Expenditure Survey of Bangladesh, Bureau of Statistics, we tell them as BBS, the country's Gini coefficient, which is the economic measure of equality, stood at 0.482 in 2016, up from 0.458 in 2010, which is a worrying development inequality in our country. You probably know that closer to 1 means more inequality in our society, and closer to 0 means less inequality. As you see, the statistics is 0.48 2016 and 0.45 in 2010. So it means our society, on the basis of economic measurement skills, also inequality is developing, and this is not a good sign for our country as well. So this is the economic context in our country, but in our sociological context, we see that we do have a different systems of social stratification. Particularly, there are 4 systems historically we'll be talking about. The first one is slavery, second is caste, third is states, and then the fourth is class. So going back to our early period of history, we probably see that in hunting and gathering societies, there was very little social stratification, mainly because there was very little way of wealth occupied by people back in those days. The development of agriculture produced considerably more wealth and a great increase in stratification. As a result, we do see today industrial and post-industrial societies are extremely complex, large number of middle class, lower class, and very small number in upper class moving towards the top. So we see that the very little number of people in our society, they are moving towards the top. So that's why we see any stratification system may include elements of more than one type of system of systems of stratification. As I mentioned before, slavery, caste, states, or class. To understand this system better, it may be helpful to review the distinction between achieved status and ascribed status. Also, you probably remember that I explained this achieved and ascribed status before. If you remember them, that's really great. If you don't, then I'll briefly describe a little bit about ascribed and achieved status. Ascribed status is a social position assigned to a person by society without regard for the person's unique talents or characteristics. For example, if your parents have lots of money or holding a certain status on a society, and you may automatically become part of this status ascribed from your parents without any hard work or struggle. On the other hand, achieved status is a social position that a person attains largely through his or her own effort. So it's not ascribed from your parents, this is achieved by your own talent and your performance. For example, when you achieve certain status without your parents or someone else's help, that will be considered as achieved status. So when we talk about social stratification, these two terms will contribute and will help us to understand different system of stratification. So the first system I'll be talking about slavery. You probably know that that achieved and ascribed will equally apply here. So the most extreme form of legalized social inequality for both individuals and groups, that is slavery. Enslaved were owned as a property by others, just as if they were household pets or appliances. So you can see how measurable situation people went through long before in our history through the slavery system. So slaves were deprived of almost all rights by law historically. For example, in ancient Greece, slaves were excluded from political position and from the military power as well. However, they were allowed to change their position depending on the circumstances of the history. In contrast, in the United States and Latin America, where slavery was as ascribed status, you probably see that that's not achieved, ascribed is coming from generation to generation. And also racial and legal barriers prevented the freeing of slaves. So slave labor system eventually broke down because of struggle they provoke and also economic or other incentives. So at present we see slavery is illegal, but it still exists in some places, but in different shapes. For example, we do see that big makers in developing countries, particularly in some parts in India and Pakistan. Also, we do see that sex slaves in Thailand and domestic slaves in wealthy countries, particularly in UAE. Today, also the Universal Declaration in Human Rights, which is binding on all members of the United Nations, prohibits slavery in all its forms. Yet more people are enslaved today than at any point in world history, despite the efforts made by human rights, declaration. In many developing countries, bonded laborers are imprisoned in virtual lifetime employment. In some countries, human beings are owned outright, but a form of slavery also exists in Europe and the United States, where guest workers and illegal immigrants have been forced to labor for years under terrible circumstances or conditions, either to pay off debts or to avoid being turned over the immigration authorities. So we do see this is extremely bad situation happening in both parts of the world. So the second system of stratification is caste, which is a very important, condition in our society. We do see particularly castes or hereditary rank that are usually religiously dictated and that tend to be fixed and immobile. Caste membership is an ascribed status. At birth, children automatically assume the same position as their parents. So you see that this is ascribed. Each, each caste is quite sharply defined, and members are expected to marry within the caste. So there are different types of caste we do see, which is historically was very popular in India, particularly Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. And also outside of those four, the fifth category of outcasts referred to as the untouchables represent 16% of the population in India. According to the Smith 2008 book, he published this report, and its members are considered so lowly and unclean as to have no place within the stratification system. In an effort to avoid perpetuating the historical stigma these people bear, the government now refers to the untouchable as scheduled caste. The untouchables themselves prefer also Dalit, the repressed, a term that communicates their desire to overcome their disadvantaged status. So there are certain conditions favoring the caste system. We can see those conditions are geographical isolation and also static society, and then foreign aggression, rural social structure, influence of religion, difference of races, lack of education. So those are the conditions favoring the caste system historically. In 1950, after gaining independence from Great Britain, India adopted a new constitution that formally outlawed the caste system. However, over the first decade or two, however, urbanization and technological advances have brought more change to India's caste system than the governments or politics has in more than half a century. And also we do see the similar system in Europe and America, particularly prior to modern time. Caste systems are found throughout the world. In Europe, Jews were frequently treated as separate caste, forced to live in restricted neighborhoods, and barred from intermarrying with non-Jews. Also in the United States, the system of stratification that characterized the southern United States from the end of Civil War through the 1960s resembled a caste system. So did the rigid system of segregation that prevailed in the Republic of South Africa under apartheid from 1948 through the 1990s. In both cases, race was the defining factor that placed a person in the social hierarchy. So we do see these similar systems also available in both parts of the world. In modern capitalist economy, however, brings peoples of different castes together. So we do see that in Indian society, the caste systems are not equally following a lot of people, and that's the similar case in other part of the world as well. So I would like to, in my first part of different system of stratification here, and I'll come back to discuss rest of the part in my second part of my lecture. Thank you.